Шановна українсько-канадська громада, Member of Parliament Bernard Troche, friends of the Ukrainian Canadian Community, and most importantly, allies of the people of Ukraine during this difficult journey that they're traveling towards democracy and social justice. Шановна громада, скільки десятків років наші діди, наші батьки і скільки між нами збиралися на демонстраціях, на мітингах перед радянським посольством, кремлівським консулятом тут в Торонті. І які надзвичайні дні то були 20 років тому, коли замість демонстрації ми святкували ті дні після Декларації Незалежності, і тоді святкували підтвердження тої української незалежності українським народом 1 грудня 20 років тому, коли понад 90% українського народу сказали: так, ми хочемо жити в свободі, ми хочемо бути вільними. І вони голосували так, не тільки задля незалежності України, а вони голосували так, щоб наступні покоління жили в правоті, в демократії, щоб в Україні нарешті, після століть, була соціальна справедливість. Як гірко, як сумно, що нам прийшлося останніми місяцями збиратися не перед московським консулятом, а перед українським. Як важко. And friends, these are incredibly difficult days for the Ukrainian Canadian community. You see, our grandparents, our parents, and many of us, we never gave up on that, what seemed to be impossible dream of Ukrainian independence and statehood. And when others scoffed, we stood and demonstrated in front of the Soviet embassy, in front of the Soviet consulate here in Toronto. And how incredible, how joyous were those days 20 years ago when we celebrated that dream of independence. An independent Ukraine achieved through a peaceful revolution where not a single bullet was fired, not a life lost. And how difficult it is today for us to gather, instead of in celebration, but to once again demonstrate, and this time in front of the Ukrainian Consulate. Friends, today we heard references to what justice looks like in Mr. Yanukovych's Ukraine. Canada invested heavily in programs to make sure that Ukraine, in this very difficult post-Soviet transition, would have an independent judiciary. And we saw how difficult that transformation was. Earlier today, one of the speakers noted that Ukraine's justice system was selective. Well, today we saw a transformation. Ukraine's justice system is no longer selective. It's become a tool of oppression. The courts, the judiciary, are not a shield to protect the people of Ukraine. They've become a weapon against the aspirations and dreams of the Ukrainian people. And we call upon the Canadian government the Canadian government has stood shoulder to shoulder with the Ukrainian Canadian community and with all those Ukrainians that dreamed of a democratic, independent, socially just Ukraine. We stood shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine when Ukraine declared her independence. We stood shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine during the Orange Revolution. And at that time, in 2004, a motion was introduced in the House of Commons that condemned President Kuchma and his regime at that time for their anti-democratic moves. And it was very specific in its wording. Not only did it condemn, it called for targeted sanctions against President Kuchma, his family, and his government cronies. And today, we call upon the Canadian government. It's well past the point for mere statements in the House of Commons. If in 2004, the House of Commons could unanimously pass a motion not only condemning, but expressing the will of Parliament for targeted sanctions, today, in a situation of majority government, we expect no less of Prime Minister Harper. We expect the Prime Minister to make a clear, unequivocal statement, not only condemning this anti-democratic Yanukovych regime, but as in other cases where we've seen that dictators and potential dictators, diplomatic nicety and diplomatic words don't have an impact. But we have seen that they do pay attention when we call for clear sanctions, and not sanctions that would hurt the people of Ukraine or hurt the futures of their children. Targeted sanctions against the president, his family, and the government of oligarchs that run his regime. Шановна українська громада, dear Ukrainian Canadian community, during the darkest days of the evil empire, our grandparents, our parents, and many of us here did not give up hope. Today, when Ukraine is once again suffering a dark chapter in her history, we cannot give up hope. We will not give up hope, because in our veins it's not the blood of kripake, it's the blood of kozake that course through our veins. Slava Ukraini!
Tymoshenko!